Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the stream. My thing is slightly the wrong size. One sec, let me just fix that real quick. My name is Dr. Rachel Tapman, and welcome to my YouTube channel, which is for anyone who cares about language technology and other people. Also, the cicadas are in fine form today, so if you hear like a sort of a screaming sound in the background, I guess that's what it is. Good morning, Matt. Hope you're doing good today. And as usual, I've organized things by topic. So we're going to start with research. Not a whole bunch today, but some still, I think, good important papers. And then just general practical stuff for, language technologists, things, you may want to know. And then politics, we got some court cases, we got some legislation, we got some updates and stuff. And then ethics, which I think is going to be probably the longest section today. There just was a lot of stuff, a lot of linguistic stuff today, and I'm going to be calm about it. It'll be fine. And then we always end with some just like lighthearted miscellaneous stuff to end on a high note. So let's hop right in with our first paper. So the first paper, which I talked about a little bit on stream Tuesday, we used it as input to the jargon translator, is a survey paper, which is Adversarial Attack and Defense Strategies of Speaker Recognition Systems, a survey. So hello, Multi-Solutions. Good to see you, as always. Speaker recognition systems are intended to identify who is talking, and they're usually used for things to determine who has access to systems, so biometrics, right? It is used to determine which speaker is producing the speech. It can also potentially be used for diarization, and that is the task of when you have multiple people speaking, determining which turn goes to which person. So if you watched the video I have of me and Yassine, where we were talking about the Hugging Faces Bloom model and sort of the process they went through to release it, you'll notice in the captions there that sometimes it says Rachel says something, Yassine says something. That's diarization. So that was first done automatically, and then I went through and hand corrected it. I think the captions on that should be pretty good. And also, you should have access to captions on this video. Hi, Ravi, good to see you. Captions on this video that are live. So there'll be a little bit more of a delay between me and you, but captioning, accessibility, it is automatic, so apologies for any errors. I do not have the money to pay for hand captions right now, unfortunately, and I can't do it myself while I'm talking live. And yes, for those of you who missed the update, the coffee mug unfortunately does have a broken handle, but you know what? It still works. I'm gonna keep using it. It holds liquid. So, survey of speaker recognition systems. And ways that they can be attacked and ways that you can defend against that attack. And the specific types of systems that they are talking about, so they aren't really talking about the diarization models. They are more talking about the sort of specific types of tasks where you're identifying, okay, there's 18 people, which of the 18 people is this? Or open speaker set is like, hey, of everybody, who do you think this is? Or, can you determine whether or not the speech sample is from a target person or not? Good morning, Dana. Welcome, welcome. Yes, and then this is the other task is to try to determine whether or not the specific words that are being said match the the useful things. Functional cups are functional. They are. Yep. Although, so some of you may not know this, but depending on how a cup is cracked, like a ceramic cup, sometimes you can use milk to fix it, which will, like, the case and bonds can like rebond the ceramic sometimes, depending. So if you do have a beloved cup that is just a little bit cracked, you might try that out. Anyway, so it's talking about a lot of the existing models, a lot of the data sets they were trained on. Good old Timnit, very, very old at this point in terms of speech data, not a good match for modern speakers, and then sort of the different types of adversarial attacks. So if you're working in the field, I think it's a really good thing to know about, and particularly, concerning, I think, is just as with adversarial attacks against computer vision systems where the data attack is not perceptible to humans. In this case, the additional feature adding, the noise adding, is not usually perceptible to humans either. So it'll sound the same to a human, but it will not look the same to a system. Just like, I want to say it was like 2016, 2017, there was that computer vision paper about adversarial attacks on self-driving cars, where they put like a sticker on a stop sign, I think, and it looked fine to humans, but to the computer vision systems, it did not. So something to know about. I, in general, would not recommend using biometrics for system access pretty much at all, period. And that is both from like a security standpoint. These adversarial attacks are kind of common. Also like a user use and enjoyment and ability to use the system aspect. So there was, actually the tweet was deleted, but someone on Twitter was talking about, they were trying to sit the bar exam, which is in the US, I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but it's the test you need to take to be a lawyer. And it's, very expensive, and there's a lot of studying, and there's a limited number of times when it's offered. And their fingertips, the ridges weren't deep enough for the fingertip reader, so they weren't allowed to sit the bar exam and had to, wait 3 months to start practicing their profession, basically. And also, if your biometrics are reliably spoofed, there's nothing you can do about that ever for the rest of your life, right? Like if I have a realistic, copy of Tom Hanks's fingerprints that I'm using to get into all of Tom Hanks's stuff, we can't do anything about that because he can't change his fingerprints. And also, in the US, there is some legal precedent that if you are using biometrics to get into a system, you are not protected from providing that information to access the system under the Fourth Amendment. So just all around, I wouldn't recommend biometrics. Add this fuel to the fire. And this is in the journal Electronics. So FYI. All right. Speaking of kind of bummer papers. So this paper is actually from 2017. And it was in the New York University Law Review. And basically it is just a paper it's a law paper that talks about the ways in which surveillance companies, so companies that are selling surveillance tools, right? Like Clearview, one of my least favorite tech companies, Clearview AI or ShotSpotter. We're going to talk about them a little longer. I don't think they existed in 2017, but basically these companies that are selling surveillance stuff, Amazon's Ring would be another great example, are having an outsized impact on policing policy in the way that civil society is not. And it is to the benefit of those companies and the detriment of, privacy rights in general and the continuing protections offered to people in the US by the Fourth Amendment. So another bummer paper. And it was written in 2017, revised in 2019. And I would say that things have not gotten better since. So, yep, just something to think about. And also, this is a preprint, so the first two papers were both fully published papers. This has not been published, but I thought it was kind of a cool paper. I'll post the link to this one because I think the other ones are going to be a little bit easier to find. And it's looking at why do tree-based models still outperform deep learning on tabular data. Robbie says they earned a bunch of dollars from our data. Yep. There's this concept called the tragedy of the commons, which gets misapplied, and I'm going to probably misapply it a little bit, but there's this idea that there is this, thing that is a public good and someone exploits it and uses it for individual profit and benefit in a way that harms everyone who, you know, contributed to the public good. So, yep. Anyway, this paper looks at, you know, hey, should we be using deep learning on tabular data, and in particular, tabular data up to around 10K samples? And the answer is no, don't do that, which I think is, I would definitely say it's probably the received wisdom in the field that tree-based models, particularly for smaller amounts of tabular data, are just way better. Whereas for, you know, unstructured data, Robbie says, yeah, about the chat to the comments, yep. For unstructured data, which is to say data that does not have a tabular structure or a tree-based structure, deep learning seems to do a little bit better. And I think this is just like a cool paper, talk about different types of things, different benchmarks, different types of models. And the thing that I thought was, you know, particularly interesting is if you look at, you know, these comparisons of different models on the same data set, you can see that, you know, ResNet, FT Transformer are down here at the bottom, and here multi-layer perceptron, ResNet, transformers are all again down here at the bottom. I'm not familiar with Saint, so I don't know what that is. And at the top are, you know, XGBoost, gradient boosting trees, random forest, XGBoost, gradient boosting trees, XGBoost, random forest, histogram gradient boosting tree. And I think the regression, this one over here in particular, is very telling, where there's a clear binomial distribution where, sure enough, boosting trees, random forests, XGBoost, which is also a gradient boosting algorithm, are doing great, and you know, in general, these deep learning models are not doing as good. So I think it's, you know, definitely vibes with my instincts and my intuitions and sort of my received wisdom in the field, but it's nice to have a citation to point to, you know? So yeah, cool paper. I think it's a good to have when you are arguing that you shouldn't have to do those for these small data sets. And there's also some discussion about why this should be, and some sort of like theoretical discussion of deep learning versus tree-based models, forest-based models, and when they work. So if you're interested in other papers, I'll also pop this in the link. This is a blog post, but it's a survey. So we talked about that in the 10 best NLP projects level up, or whatever that video was called. We talked about survey papers there. And this is a blog post of a survey, and goes through a couple of different papers in chronological order, looking at this particular problem using deep learning with tabular data. And the sort of general consensus is don't. Why would you? It's more expensive. It doesn't work as well. So yeah, might also be interesting for those of you who are interested in, I forget who did the prize. I'd have to go back and look at it, but we talked a while ago about prizes where finding tasks for which smaller models did better. And I think that handling tabular data may just be one of those tasks. And finally, so this is, I'll pop this link in the chat as well. So this is actually an invited talk at the University of Washington, where I did my graduate school work, from Ido Dagan, I'm probably going to say that wrong. Basically, the premise of this talk, it's an hour and a half. We're not going to go through it, but if you're interested, could be interesting to look at, is talking about sort of his ideas and research program around moving away from end-to-end learning and moving towards more modular, pipeline construction. Because in end-to-end learning, things are less predictable, they're less explainable, and for a lot of commercial applications in particular, end-to-end learning has many more undesirable traits than doing the same task as a series of smaller tasks. So good talk if you're interested in that. Very much, by researchers for researchers, but nonetheless, I think interesting and useful. And that's all the research, not a whole bunch today. Let's move on to practical stuff. So, speaking of not doing things end-to-end with deep learning, you may have seen some discussion of this on Twitter, where I think, I want to say Jeff Dean said that something like 3% of Google's code base is now auto-completed. And I think there's been a lot of excitement and discussion on Twitter that sort of overplays the role of machine learning in the system. So this is basically an auto-completion thing. It is not like Colab. The way that the machine learning is actually used is for ranking the potential outputs, and then before they are actually selected as the correct output, they do a semantic correctness checks using cached abstract syntax trees, or I guess cached abstract syntax trees if you're Australian, to enable a full structural understanding. So there is a machine learning component to it, but there's also a larger, I would say, obviously I haven't interacted with the system, so I don't know if it's the fact that it is a larger part of the system, but my guess is that, if you remove one of the bits, this is the bit I would recommend not removing. So yeah, interesting hybrid system, some machine learning, some rule-based, and currently in production. And honestly, I would trust a system like this a lot more than something like Colab, where it's just could be anything, All right. Some local news from Virginia. So if you're not familiar with Virginia, it's sort of it's a state on the US Eastern Seaboard, sort of in the southeast. It's sort of triangle shaped. And the top of the triangle right above it is Washington, D.C., which is the national capital of the United States. And an area of really bad traffic. So NOVA is short for Northern Virginia, and it refers to the sort of area close to DC where people who work in DC live. And I'm from sort of, if you're thinking about the triangle, I'm from sort of like the bottom half of the state. And there's a pretty big cultural divide between the top half and the bottom half of the state. And if you're familiar with like the South as a place in the US, I would say culturally the line where the South began kind of goes through the middle of the state. And I'm from, definitely Richmond is below that line. Historically, it actually went above Maryland, which is the state above Virginia. But anyway, I don't want to get too much into, history and politics of the Eastern Seaboard. But they're going to be doing a pilot study. So the Virginia Department of Transportation is the state organization in charge of things like roads and deciding when to open the express lanes in which direction, and like salting the roads if there's ice, and deciding what roads to build, et cetera, and they're preparing to use artificial intelligence as a traffic prediction system. So I think that is interesting, and yeah, we'll see how it goes. Brett says, I had a case of bad ML when doing a data viz, I'm guessing, on gender and homeownership. One company did a report and used ML to guess gender. Don't do that. I used census data set that showed data and owner. The machine learning was off by a third. Yeah, don't infer gender. In general, just not a good thing to do. I think this is a great example of why you shouldn't, because it was very, very wrong in this case. No. Robbie says, loops, some algorithms, some basic programs to autocomplete. Yeah, I mentioned actually in the video I did on my top 10 favorite language technologies. Autocomplete is up there. Love a good autocomplete. I think it's very, very powerful and a great accessibility tool, but you gotta be careful, right? You have to be careful when avoiding automation bias there. Yeah, so I guess I'll keep an eye on you and let you know how it goes. Robbie says, I don't think it's traffic like in India. No, that is definitely the case. So I don't know. One of the things that I enjoy sort of studying and learning about in my free time is just sort of public and civil infrastructure around the world. And I was recently learning about traffic in India, and I would say it's very different. Yep. Luke, hello. Welcome to the stream. All right. Also, in just sort of practical stuff, if you are working on a data science project and you'd like some free consulting by students, reach out to Rude Boy Bert on Twitter. He's a professor at Smith College here in the United States, and they have a capstone. Basically, it's like the end of a course of study for their seniors in data science, and they're looking for projects for their students to work on. Bjorn says, we just take a bicycle in the Netherlands. Yeah. Biking infrastructure in the US is not as good, and also things are much further apart. But yeah, I'm also a fan of biking when it's possible. Robbie says, Colab is good for computer science homework. Yeah, I get the impression that it's really really helpful for a lot of folks, particularly if you don't have access to a GPU otherwise. So. Oh, sorry, I said Colab, I meant Copilot. That's what it's called, right? The GitHub one, the GitHub autocomplete. I'm pretty sure it's Copilot. Yes, no, nothing against Colab. I know a lot of people on the Colab team. Or I guess a lot of people who used to be on the Colab team. Some of them have moved on. Yeah. Brett says, the US should build high-speed rail, but they have to deal with Boeing lobbyists. I mean, yes. Also, the US is like really big, really big. So I used to live in Seattle, right? And then I moved back home to Virginia. And that distance, which was completely in the United States, was about as far as the distance between Kyiv and Lisbon. So basically all of Europe to go across the US. Yes, which is another big challenge. And we did have a lot more rail, and then we just stopped using it, basically. So a lot of existing rail lines fell into disrepair and are no longer usable. Copilot, yes, thank you, Gustav, that is what I meant. Yeah, I'd love to see more of it. And actually the sort of the northeast seaboard is a place where there's a lot of population density and it's not quite as big, and there is some high-speed rail there. Copilot, yeah. All right, so that's okay. I'm pretty sure I was the one who misspoke originally, so apologies for that. Yeah, so reach out to Professor Kim if you're interested in getting some help. Next up, Luke, you're gonna like this one. Nope, that's the wrong one. I'll just switch the order. So this is from a blog, but I verified it with another source as well. I've mentioned a couple times on stream I don't really use Chrome unless I have to for technical reasons, but mostly I use Firefox. And in Firefox 102, one of the things that Mozilla introduced, because it's one of the things that Firefox as a browser focuses on is user privacy. And by default, URL stripping is now enabled. So, you know, if you have the question mark, blah, 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 source equals Facebook blast, whatever it is at the end of a link, it's removed. And as a result, what Facebook has done is that they've now, the information is still included in the URL, but the URL is encrypted, which means that you can't if I had something at the end of this URL, you can't see it. If I had something at the end of the URL that was question mark, nope, that's also not gonna work. That was question mark, whatever, whatever. you can't just erase that and get back to the original link. You have to follow the link with the tracking, and you can't remove it. So that's a cool thing. That's pretty, what would I call that? Against privacy preserving, I guess is what I would call that. And Luke and I were talking about that on Twitter a while ago, but yep. Facebook is another thing I don't use as much as I can handle. Anyway, FYI. Also on sort of the security thing. So this is a company in China that was hit with a big fine. Yeah, exactly. Bresh has like a little example of what the thing at the end might look like. So I'm actually not familiar with this company, but also I've never used a ride-hailing app in China, so why would I be? And they were hit with a fine for a number of reasons, one of which was storing information in plain text. So maybe don't do that. Just a good reminder for us all. I think the T-Mobile hack a while ago was also because they were storing passwords in plain text. So yeah, maybe, again, there are good and bad uses of encryption, and, you know, reducing privacy is maybe not the best use of it, but increasing security is maybe a very good use of it. So yeah, maybe avoid storing information in plain text. And the other thing that they did that was included in the reason for the fine is that they used passenger data, including photos that they had on their phone, and using facial recognition without their knowledge or consent. So some extremely, you know, poor engineering practices, and I would also say, you know, unethical engineering practices. And as a result, this company got really, really slapped with a fine, and good, right? This type of behavior should not be allowed, certainly not rewarded. No. Super tracky. I lost signal. It looks like my stream health is okay to me. Let me know if any of the rest of y'all are having trouble seeing. I guess you wouldn't know, would you? I'm just gonna open it in another tab so I can see if that's the case. Okay, it looks like I'm still live. Yeah, it looks good to me. Apologies if you're having issues. The URL tracking could be like tinyURL. Yes, exactly. Very similar, and I would say that, you know, from a security perspective, my friends who work in security have long recommended that I not click on tinyURL links because you don't know what's at them, right? So, yeah. But I mean, yeah, it's to some degree, it's up to your personal risk tolerance and appetite for handling that sort of like potentially risky thing. All right. Also on the practical side, I'll pop this link in the chat as well. So I've mentioned FastAI a couple of times. So Jeremy Howard and Rachel Thomas, who is not the same as me, we are different people. I know we're both called Rachel when we work in machine learning. We're very different people. Sorry, I get confused for her quite a bit, have launched a new version of their FastAI course, Practical Deep Learning. I haven't actually gone through this course, but in general, I would say that their educational material tends to be extremely high quality, and I've recommended it in the past. And I don't see a good reason why this would be any different. So if you are interested in particularly deep learning, I'd recommend this as a good starting point. All right, looks like it's okay for Brett with YouTube as well. Yeah, it might be on your end, Robbie. Sorry about that. I hope that clears up. Yeah. Next up, so this is more of, I would say, it's a good introduction for more like a non-technical persona, and this is by Catherine Breslin, who is, actually I think her background's in linguistics, but she has been working in NLP for a long time. She has just an enormous depth of knowledge about the field. And this article, which I really don't like the way that the text is like semi-transparent, is a really good discussion of sort of like where the field is now, where it came from, what was going on. And, you know, I mean, like I said, she's been in the field for a while. She has firsthand experience of a lot of this. So a good thing to pass on to other people in your circle who might be like, what's up with this sentient AI sort of thing. I don't know why that's there. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my dog. I think I misclicked on a link that I didn't mean to. Anyway, also on the practical stuff, so this is the last one in this section. If you have taken a lot of sort of intro physics courses, you may be familiar with removing the distracting part of the screen. There we go. You may be familiar with the examples that you're talking about, you know, classical Newtonian stuff, and part of the discussion will be like, assume a spherical cow of uniform density and no air resistance, right? So simplifying assumptions made to make the process of modeling easier. And Jeff Bingham, who looks like he's a professor, manager at Apple, and has done some work with HCI, human computing interaction. I think human computer interaction, I think, is the field. Started off this discussion and I thought there were some pretty good things in here. And my first thought immediately was IID. So the idea of individual identical distribution, identical individual distribution. One sec, I'm gonna double check. But basically the idea that the distribution and the target population and the sample population are identical and that the future population will also be identical, which kind of doesn't always work out that way. Independent, there we go, and identically distributed data. Also, apparently, Imperial Irrigation District, an irrigation district that serves the Imperial Valley in Southern California. The more you know. And a couple of good examples here. Convexity, so assuming the function is convex and therefore has a single findable minimum. IID, which is exactly what I was going to say, and so are other people. Assuming a function exists between the input features and the desired output feature. I think that this is, you know, if that is not true, you cannot do machine learning. And I would say that my stance is that for any given output feature, desired output feature, there are input features that will give you information about it, and perhaps information that is great enough for you to guess it at above chance levels. However, there is no guarantee that for a given output feature, a specific set of input features are going to have that information in it. And this tends to be something where a lot of people who are newer to machine learning get tripped up on, especially if you've been only working on data sets that have been prepared for class, where this is the case. A lot of times the information you need is just not captured in the data set, and there is nothing you can do about it besides collect more data or ask a different question. Brett says bovinexity, yeah. Bove here being relating to bovines, which are cows. It's actually it's a broader group than just cattle, but it includes domestic cattle. Every tokenization scheme ever devised, we've talked a little bit on the channel about how words are fake, and I think this is a great example of somebody else agreeing with me. Therefore, I'm disposed to like this person because they say the same things that I do. Yep. Loss functions, the idea that the quality of your solution can be estimated by an easy to compute function, which I think is fair. Yeah, infinite width neural network. Yeah, that's a big one. So the reason that people are yes, there are multilingual models. That doesn't mean that NLP is solved. So the reason that neural networks are exciting and useful as a class of models is with an infinite width neural network, you can approximate any function, right? They're universal function approximators. That does not mean that given your data and your network architecture, you can correctly approximate the function that you need, or even approximate it to a useful enough degree to actually work on your thingadoo that you're doing. Anyway, lots of good discussion. I'll pop this in the chat if any of y'all want to poke around in there, or you know, add some of your own thoughts if you are a Twitter user. All right, politics. So I mentioned we got some court cases, we got some legislation. Let's get into it. I love coffee. Anyway. All right, well, I'm not logged in, and I will just tell you what's going on here. Get smaller, just so you can see a little bit more. So this is a really unfortunate thing. There was I believe this was a court case. So in Spanish, which is the language of education in Buenos Aires, you have grammatical gender, right? So nouns are either masculine or feminine. Spanish is one of the languages that only has 2 grammatical genders. Other languages may have more or fewer, or they may be used in more or fewer places. So in English, we kind of have grammatical gender, right? So we have gendered pronouns, but we also have non-gendered pronouns, right? So he, she, they not having gender associated with it, or not having a masculine or feminine gender associated with it. German has a neuter gender, for example, as well. And then anyway, it's a grammatical complexity. And in Spanish, there is a language change going on where more and more people are beginning to use and adopt in different situations a third gender, right? So a neuter gender in Spanish. Wait, is that the fashion? You are right. I definitely did have things from our studio. Let me see where it is. I did not forget. It should be in here. I did. So that thing that I said, I don't know why this is in here, the last London fashion thing, in fact, should have been the our studio information. Whoop. Let me finish this and we'll go back to our studio. Thank you, Nine Gaming. It was in fact in the list. I just didn't copy the link correctly, apparently. Anyway, so this is ongoing language change, and then in this case, there has been a ban on the use of this third gender that's evolving in Spanish as a way to discriminate against non-binary students, basically. And this is a great example where you might say, like, well, this is just like legislation about, language, but it affects the people who are using the language. And oftentimes, if you have political restrictions on language use, it is used as a way to discriminate against specific types of people and specific individuals. So there's this idea of linguistic discrimination. And I think this is really, I wouldn't say it's a good, but it is an example of it where a prescriptivist, so trying to tell people how they should use language, a prescriptivist position is having negative impacts on marginalized people. Yeah. Yep. And more discussion of Bolsonaro. Yep. Lehigh says, why is R not that popular on Kaggle? I think a big part of it is that lots of reasons. So that for those of you who may not know, I actually used to work at Kaggle. I have a Kaggle water bottle up here. Lots of reasons, and I think part of it is that Python is the default language. So when you open a new notebook, it is in Python and not in R. And also Dan, who used to run Kaggle Learn, it's now run by Alexis. removed my R courses and made a decision to only do Python in the Kaggle Learn situation. So if you came to Kaggle and you're like, I want to learn things, you learn it in Python, because the R courses are no longer available. So I would say a big part of it is institutional and design choices that have changed behavior. With that in mind, let's do the thing that I completely missed. Yeah, no, this is the right thing. Very weird. Okay. Yes, I did actually have the news from our studio conf. Yeah, love the Kaggle datasets. Good, good. That's actually what I worked on. I didn't work on competitions at all. I worked on datasets and notebooks and Kaggle Learn. So if you're not familiar, RStudio is a probably my favorite IDE actually, and it is specifically for data scientists and analysts and statisticians. And the RStudio company has done a lot of development work in R. Hadley Wickham works at RStudio, has also been really instrumental in the Tidyverse. And RStudio conference, which is going on right now, I believe, currently. I'm not going. Perhaps, obviously, Beth says pop-up ad max. Yeah, I think that might be it. Bjorn says doing a master's degree in machine learning now, and they just switched the last programming course, which was in R, to Python. Yes. So I don't necessarily think that that's bad from a pedagogical standpoint, because you don't, if there's only one course in R, you also have to teach people R. However, I've talked about this before. If you've ever tried to do statistical computing in Python, it is difficult. And if you've used pandas in Python, pandas is a re-implementation of the base R functionality. And there's just been less development work on the data science and analysis and statistics workflow in Python than there has been in R. R is a specialized language for a specialized task. Once you know R, it is much faster to do things like produce visualizations, do statistical analyses. If you're doing any causal inference, I still don't know of any Python packages that are useful for that. Pretty much all the causal inference stuff has been done in R. If you are working in bioinformatics, the bioinformatics tool flow is in R. A lot of the genomic stuff is in R. So if you are just doing general machine learning for production, I think that it's perfectly fine not to use R. But if you are doing a program which includes a large amount of analysis, or you are working in the particular verticals where R is the language of choice, I would say don't try to reinvent the wheel in Python. You're just going to be frustrated and work much slower than all of your colleagues. So yeah, it's not dead by any means of by any stretch of the imagination. It is just a specialized tool, whereas Python is a general purpose tool. And 10, 20 years from now, is anyone going to still be using Python? I don't know. It's not that old as a programming language, and it's gotten very big and very sort of, there's a lot of disconnected nodes in the Python community, which I think is pretty interesting. And I don't know what the future of it's going to look like, but I mean, S has been around for a long time, and I would be shocked if R ever went away completely, just because it's good at what it's good at. And Python is, if you push hard enough, kind of okay at what it's good at. But yeah, so RStudio, the company that builds the IDE, is changing their name to Posit, and they're also going to be supporting Python and VS Code. And this, honestly, this feels like it's been coming for a while, just sort of being in the R community. And obviously they are not going to be doing R anymore, but they should be making it easier to move back and forth between things, which makes sense. I think particularly with like DataSpell coming out, it makes sense for them to remain competitive in the market, to increase their scope a little bit, because the field has more diversity of language use now. Yep. Oh, Bjorn says, I do not have an opinion on R versus Python. I come from a C and Delphi background, and still feels a bit strange working with loosely typed languages somehow still. Yeah. Yep. You can choose not to use duck typing in Python. And in R, everything's a vector. So some vectors have more information in them than others, but everything is a vector. Dr. Gio says Python is 35 years old or so. Yeah, I'm pretty sure S is much. Is it that old? One sec. Sorry. That face was me realizing I thought Python started to be a thing in the 90s, 10 years ago. The 90s were not 10 years ago. Yeah. Very early 90s. Yes. S is 1880. Yeah, so S had been around for a while. I don't know why the 90s feel like very recent and the 80s don't, but yeah. Yeah, thanks, Dr. Gio. I appreciate that. Luke says, sits in a corner learning Python. Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing about R is if you know pandas, it's pretty quick to learn R, because pandas is, again, a re-implementation of basic R functionality. If you know SQL, it's pretty quick to learn R because the way that you manipulate data, particularly in tidyverse, borrows idioms from SQL. So, yeah. Dr. Gia says, fellow old. Yes. I don't think I'm that old, but then if I think about sort of like the demographics of the machine learning community as a whole, maybe I'm a little bit old. Anyway, yeah. Brett says, I think I saw some R VS Code integration, so it looks like a specialist IDE. It's very much a specialist IDE, absolutely. And I would say it's best for a workflow when you need to look at data constantly, like you need to visualize data. So the sort of default setup is you have, a scripting window to just run stuff. You have your, long form code window where you write your code and then you run it in the scripting window. And then you have a visualization window where you see your visualizations and you can go back and forth between them and save them and zoom and etc. So yeah, if you have to look at things a lot, R is a great choice. Thank you for helping me figure out what that weird tab was. Back to politics. So we talked a little bit about how surveillance companies shape policing in the US. So ShotSpotter, if you're not familiar, is a company that claims to be able to know when gunshots happen. And based on my understanding of sort of reviews that have been done, it doesn't work well. And in this particular case, so this is based on a 2021 police stop where a driver ended up being arrested, and the attorneys from the public defenders, so basically these are who you would be assigned to help defend your rights if you were accused of a crime and couldn't pay your own lawyer, say that the police pulled the man over based on a ShotSpotter alert, and is trying to subpoena the company to figure out if that's the case. So subpoenas are when the court asks for information, and subpoenas are pretty serious and they can be used to get around things that would usually be used to keep data private, right? So an example here is research data. Research data that is sensitive is not disclosed. There's a informed consent and confidentiality, etc., but it's still able to be subpoenaed, right? So if the court asks for it, you have to do it. And ShotSpotter is basically saying, actually, we don't want to be subpoenaed. We are asking that you hold us in contempt of court so that we don't have to give you that information. So yeah, I am not a lawyer. I just read in the area. But yeah, I think this will be interesting. And I think it's another great example of how a surveillance company is influencing policing here in the US. And Chicago is pretty notorious for having particularly aggressive policing, I would say. Anyway, and I'll pop this in the chat as well. So I think this court case could be potentially interesting in the degree to which machine learning companies can, surveillance companies can basically just like thumb their nose at the courts and public defenders and be like, screw you, we don't got to tell you nothing. The public just gives us money for who knows what. Yep, as Brett says, so ShotSpotter was used by the police for the fishing expedition. I believe that is what the lawyers of the public defenders are claiming. And sort of a big issue with these, crime detection things. There's actually something going on in Richmond, which is where I live, Richmond, Virginia right now, which is sort of similar, where the police use, computer said so as an excuse to basically harass civilians. Predictive policing. If you're not familiar with the history of it in the United States and you're interested in looking it up, that's what I'd look up, like a history of predictive policing in the United States. It's explicitly racist. I will tell you that much straight off the bat. Anyway. In other bad news, so I mentioned a while ago that Virginia at a state level had a prohibition against the use of facial recognition technology by the police that was repealed. To my chagrin, and New Orleans has just done the exact same thing. The city council is like, actually, we do want to use facial recognition technology. So that's happening. Dr. Gio says predictive policing is a nightmare. Very much so. Very much so. And a huge infringement on civil liberties. And yet, here we are. The difference now is that we, as, individuals are paying surveillance companies in order to infringe on our civil liberties. Speaking of civil liberties, this politics section is pretty US focused. I'm sorry about that. It just happened to work out this way. The ADPPA, so the American Data Privacy Protection Act, which, by the way, just came out of the House committee. It's the Senate that's going to be the blocker for whether or not this gets passed, but potentially it might, because a lot of Democrats are in favor of this act. Some Republicans are, because it would rein in tech companies, and there's a lot of sort of like anti-tech sentiment in sort of Republican legislatures, legislators, TORS. So we'll see. It's moving forward. But this is a little comparison between the ADPPA, so this is the proposed legislation for all of the United States, and the CCPA, which is the Californian Privacy Act, and the California laws that are already enacted. And I will pop this in the chat as well if you would like to see it. And this was shared by a legal scholar. John Oliver makes a piece about data privacy, and a privacy law gets passed. Who'd have thunk? Well, it's not passed yet. We'll see. I think it would be great. I think it would be great to have any privacy protection at a federal level in the U.S. government. Although, given the recent Supreme Court case limiting the ability of federal bodies like the EPA to do their job, I guess it's sort of an open question to what degree we would be actually benefiting from this act, but it would be better than nothing. Data says if only local and state governments require these companies to participate in data sharing agreements if they get government contracts. I think they should tell people what they're doing, right? But data sharing in this case could very much be used to further violate individuals' privacy. So I think that's a little bit like the Ring thing. Amazon is basically just giving police Ring data that they asked for and more than they asked for without the knowledge or consent of the people whose data is being used. But ShotSpotter should be banned in general. Man, not a fan. They are on my list of companies that I am mad at as a citizen. Let me put it that way. Comparison between the proposed law that would potentially cover all Americans and then the Californian law. So the American law covers more, the national law covers more entities, right? So it includes individuals, whereas the Californian regulation only affects, big companies, basically. The ADPPA has no protection against further amendments that would weaken it. The ADPPA is, so sort of if this column is green, it means that the ADPPA is more protective. If this column is red, it means that it's less protective. So in general, it would be an improvement, except in a couple instances. This one is for privacy impact assessments. The proposed ADPPA, large data holders must conduct biannual privacy impact assessments that weigh the benefits of data use against the potential adverse consequences or privacy. And I'm just going to stick a pin in this and we can talk about it later, but just note that there is existing draft legislation that would require an impact assessment by companies biannually, so every 2 years, whereas the CDPPA says covered businesses must conduct regular risk assessments weighing the benefits of data processing against risk to consumers with the goal of not engaging in practices whose risks outweigh their benefits, must be submitted to CPPA. CPPA can issue regulations governing these risk assessments. So the risk assessments and impact assessments the requirements are more stringent in the Californian situation. But other than that, generally, the ADPPA is going to provide stronger protections. I'd love for this to be passed. I really, really would. You may be familiar with in Europe, GDPR, now the DSA. There's a lot more protections for privacy in Europe overall than we have in the US. All right. The UK, however, so this is particularly interesting. We'll talk about something a little bit related a little bit later on. Also, I know that there is no space over there for the text. That's just the way the web page is. That's not something I can fix right now. Interestingly, the UK is set to introduce new provisions in copyright law to permit data mining and analysis of data sets for commercial use. This would have an effect on all parties who license or permit third parties to access their data. So it sounds like the UK is set to make it much easier to legally do data scraping. And whereas previously copyright holders could be like, no, you can't do that with my data. The new provision, if it passes, would potentially be like, you can't do that. If you're licensing the data, you have to allow scraping. So interesting to see where that goes. And if you are in the UK or working with data from the UK, I would definitely talk to a lawyer if you had questions about that. All right, ethics. I'm going to be calm. I'm going to be calm in this section. There's a couple things that really got my goat. I'm just going to be straight up about it, and I'm going to try and be fair, and I'm going to try and be calm. I'm reminding myself of that. So first off, Amazon bought a healthcare chain. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the United States, in the United States, healthcare is private and for-profit, which means that if you go to the doctor's office, usually it's run by a company or it's owned by, a coalition of providers. And you pay for it as an individual. Some people do get government assistance with healthcare. It's called Medicare and Medicaid. It really only applies to people who are retired and people who are, for a variety of reasons, don't make a lot of money or are on disability, but it's pretty limited, the situations in which you get government support with healthcare in the US. Brett says, so ML could read books and write in an author's style. Yeah, I think that is, TBD, but potentially. I guess the second question is, would those be any good? And probably not, but maybe, it would be confusing enough for consumers that consumers would buy the fake book instead of the real book they wanted. And again, I think it's, TBD what that looks like in the future. Yes, so One Medical is one of these companies. They have doctor's offices, and you can go to a doctor office and it's owned by One Medical, and you pay One Medical for the medical care you receive. And now Amazon has bought it. And this is bad news. I was not delighted to see this. So one of the things that I mentioned that in America, in the US, I should say, we don't have a lot of data privacy protections. The two big ones that do exist that we do have are FERPA, which is for educational data, and then HIPAA, which is for health data. And HIPAA only applies to health care providers, which now includes Amazon, right? Which, to be fair, I think that they were providing health care previously through like telehealth and stuff like that, but now they are also providing straight up doctor's offices. And Corey Quinn has a really good thread about this. So if you're not familiar with him, he is on Twitter. He does, he's like an AWS expert. He talks a lot about AWS, but he doesn't work for Amazon. Robbie says, the link asked me for email ID, the Washington Post. Oops. I have removed the bit. I've extended the screen so you can't see the bit where it's asking me for stuff. Yep. So he had a really good thread about why this is an issue. And remember, this is someone who is very knowledgeable about Amazon's whole thing. So a thing that he points out is that the company that they have integrated with now has the right to access my medical records under HIPAA, and it opens up a huge problem for abuse. So remember, HIPAA, affects health data, and it affects health data held by health providers. Amazon has a policy against using seller-specific data to aid its private label businesses, but Jeff Bezos testified to Congress that he can't guarantee that such a policy would never be violated. Now extend that to your medical data. So basically the idea here is that your medical data, like, let's say you have, you go to the doctor, you've got really bad headaches, and you go to one of these One Medical providers. Now that's in your health information. Amazon has that health information, and potentially in the future they're like, you know what, we're not selling enough like headache gadgets on Amazon, so we're going to look through our information, find all the people who've had bad headaches, and then use that to target them, basically. With access to healthcare now under attack in a variety of states, including abortion, we talked about that quite a bit. Do you want your medical data handled by a company who has warehouses and customers in those states? Read as vulnerable to pressure, right? So let's say Texas, for example, has passed a lot of very I'm trying to find the words for this. Texas has passed a lot of legislation and has a lot of sort of state level policies that are directly harmful to transgender people. Amazon has like businesses in Texas, so Texas legislatures come to Amazon as like, hey, we need to know everyone who's gotten, hormone replacement therapy everywhere, right? We want to know if they're coming into Texas so that we can arrest them at the border for doing something that's a crime in Texas. And Amazon says no, and Texas is like, all right, we're closing down all your warehouses, is sort of the idea there. I don't know, like, again, this is just pure supposition, but a worry. Robbie says, one benefit of Amazon, suppose you're going to a party, then you purchase high-priced clothes, and then after the party finishes, you return to Amazon and your money is refunded. I mean, that is... So in that situation, I would probably recommend renting instead, because what happens there is that the refund comes from the seller and not Amazon. So this has been a big problem with authors selling ebooks, where someone will buy the ebook, read the ebook, and then return it for a refund. And as a result, the authors are charged more than they were paid for the ebook originally, so they lose money on those returns. Amazon does not take on that risk. Amazon still gets their cut, right? Brett says the data could also influence health insurance. Absolutely, 100%. Related to pleasure, if you openly criticize Amazon, that's something I do kind of a lot. Are you sure that some upset exec won't go browsing through your medical file? I mean, really sure? I'm not. I once wrote that you can't trust Amazon when it feels threatened. Extend that to when a $1.2 trillion company might do when it has a bad quarter or two. The potential for misuse or abuse is massive. HIPAA protects medical records from external disclosure. It's unclear to me about what internal restrictions, if any, apply to that data. You've got terminal cancer, no need to send you an Amazon Prime renewal, is the example. Brett says, Amazon as a pharmacy could buy cheaper generic meds, but that's different to healthcare. And I mean, my question to you is, if Amazon is providing pharmacy services, what are their incentives? Their incentives are to make sure that you are using them as a service. You can't use it you can't have access to your meds anyplace else and then raise the prices to increase their profit margins, right? They're a corporation, they want to make money. Their responsibility is not to you as a consumer, their responsibility is to their shareholders and to increase profits. Robbie says sellers get their money after 10 days from Amazon. Yeah, Amazon is not great for sellers, is my understanding. This entire thread could now possibly be neutralized by Amazon PR rep tweeting, ignore Kari, that's just the syphilis talking. You sure do have a lot of medical issues that require time away from work. I wonder why Amazon recruiting never reaches out to you to schedule a job interview. Must be a coincidence. Since this cred is going beyond my usual circles, a bit of context. I'm an external Amazon observer, specifically AWS. I snark about them, but I also think about a lot of what they do is admirable. I'm really rarely alarmist about things like this, and I don't have an axe to grind. I believe that the overwhelming majority of Amazonians are excellent humans with high integrity who chose to work for Amazon. I also believe that mistakes happen and that machine learning, registered trademark, is excellent at occluding inappropriate uses of data. So basically, stick in a machine learning model, computer says no. Why did the computer say no? Well, I don't know. It turns out they had access to your health records all along, and that information was used to make hiring decisions, right? Anyway, bad news. And one of the sort of trends, I would say, in this session of Congress is discussions of antitrust. Antitrust, right? And anti-monopoly legislation, because consolidation of information and services like these into a few very powerful, very large corporations is harmful to consumers. Anyway, moving on to other things. So we talked a little bit about data scraping in the UK and potential copyright changes. Robbie says, yeah, it's true. You can talk with the people who sell on Amazon online. Yeah, there's a very small number of people that Amazon is good to and for, and it is the people who are extremely rich now, thanks to Amazon. I mean, I think they do some things that are okay to neutral, so they're not quite as high on my list of companies I would evaporate if I could, as like Clearview and ShotSpotter, but they're not that low down the list. Anyway, I warned you this ethics section was gonna make me kind of upset. That's okay. I'm gonna be fair and calm. Brett says, once they corner the market, I guess being in New Zealand, we have no socialized health system and the government has a department that buys the generic drugs to save money. They do it for social good and not dollars. Yep. So, interesting discussion here. OpenAI has a model that they're going to be using to generate songs. And there was a really interesting discussion on Twitter, and I will copy the link for you, about the data use. So for those of you that aren't familiar, both music itself, right, like the organization of notes, the performance of the music, so the specific performance of a specific song by a specific artist, and also the lyrics of music are all protected by copyright. Some tunes are out of copyright, but that doesn't mean that the performance of the tunes are out of copyright, right? So, I mean, if any of you do YouTube, you also will be very familiar with the copyright strike system and the sort of the dire warnings that you get about it. And this model is trained on recordings of artists, and as far as people can tell, it does not include the it was not done with the permission of those artists or the license holders of that music. And if you're unfamiliar, musical license holders are notoriously litigious, particularly in the United States. So most popular music is licensed under a small handful of licensing organizations. So I think one of them is like BMI, I think, and then there's like ADCAP or something like that. But most popular music in the United States is licensed by 2 or 3 music licensing organizations. And they are... again, very litigious. They really want to have control over the use of music. And I think this is something that probably was not cleared with them, potentially. But, yep. So, sort of an open question about the legality of what they're doing, but also in terms of potentially, you know, harming artists. I think that's a possible harm of this model, right? Is that the music companies are like, we don't need to pay you. We're just going to generate our own songs and hold copyright on those songs or whatever. Brett says, if they're in the UK, then it's legal. So the thing that we talked about is specifically for text, as far as I know, and also is set to introduce, so it has not been introduced yet. And also OpenAI is based in San Francisco, I believe. Where were we? So, yeah. Question mark about the ethics, question mark about the legality. And I think this also applies to like art, right? Training computer vision models using people's art, again, without their knowledge or consent. Anyway. Dr. Gio says, Sony litigious? Never. Yep. That said, OpenAI does have pretty deep pockets, and they're willing to do sort of questionable stuff and see if they get away with it. So I guess we'll see if they get away with it. Continuing on this sort of theme of IP and copyright, I thought that this discussion was really, really interesting. So this is from the podcast Access for Who, and this is just like a little snippet. I'll pop this in the chat in case y'all want to listen to the whole thing. But when we talk about things like copyright and IP, intellectual property law, that is very, very Western, and it is very focused particularly on the US and Europe. In North America and Europe, I think it's, Canadian and Mexican copyright law, to my understanding, is also pretty similar. And, particularly in the US, we're a very individualist society. There's a lot of instances of people like copyrighting things that are part of other people's cultural heritage and just sort of doing it because they can. And I thought that this discussion was particularly interesting. So it's by Open Restitution Africa, and it was a discussion about, okay, how do you think about copyright and ownership of data and ownership of objects in a cultural milieu that is much more collective, where there is this cultural understanding that this object or this pattern or this thing that would otherwise be covered by IP and attributed to an individual is part of the collective heritage. And I'm from the US. I've mostly been raised here. This is sort of my cultural milieu, my place in the world, and the way that I look at things and understand things is through that lens. But I think it's really important to think about particularly if we're in a position of power, white Americans, that our way is not the only way, and it's important to consider other people's ways and other cultures' ways, and how what we do and the decisions that we make reflect our cultural position. Anyway. Dr. Geo. And with that in mind, okay. This is one of the ones that I know is going to make me livid. So I'm just going to take a big, deep, calm breath. So there was this claim and I saw this at a couple different places. I saw a couple people discussing this on Twitter. I don't think there has been a paper published about this, but it's sort of like somebody's flag planting. And flag planting is like, I'm going to do this, and then you do it. And in this case, it is a professor in Australia who claims that an Aboriginal language, specifically Jingulu, I may be saying that incorrectly, has characteristics that allow it to be easily translated into AI commands because it only has 3 verbs. So, a couple things about this is, first of all, that is incorrect. This language has a lot of verbs. Secondly, this... So this professor is, I believe, does a lot of stuff around like swarms and herdings and reinforcement learning. Not a linguistics expert, not an NLP expert, and the co-author on this work is an applied linguist. Applied linguists are not the same as other linguists. They work specifically on language pedagogy and related topics, which again, not the same as other linguistics, does not mean that you are an expert on capital G grammar, capital L language. So, Andre says, global nonprofit organization Creative Commons may help you with data licensing. Yeah, Creative Commons is great. Wikimedia is another place to find, data with more permissive licensing, which is why a lot of text training is done on Wikipedia data. Yes. So... This, Dr. Geo says, it's giving white supremacy. Yes. And to be fair, I don't believe that this professor is white, but that does not mean that he is not working in a, again, place where he's not coming from a cultural, cultural standpoint of white supremacy. So there is... a long history, particularly in Australia, particularly towards Aboriginal people. And I should say, not just Australia, sort of like Oceania as a whole. I'm looking at y'all too in New Zealand, where the indigenous peoples of the region were described as being subhuman, less than human, having, very simple languages, having, reduced capacity for thought and pain, etc. And this is very much something that comes directly from eugenics, directly from race sciences. So, first of all, the idea that any human language is just inherently less complex, is just inherently less rich, is, from a linguistic standpoint, false. But categorically, verifiably false. All languages have the same capacity to, encode and communicate thought. And that is true of all human languages. They are value neutral. No language is better than another. Also, it's wrong. It is wrong. From a linguistic standpoint. So I'm just going to pop up a grammar of the language. So this was published in 2003. If you're not familiar with what a grammar is, it is a description by a linguist of the constructions and properties of the language. And if we just pop open over here, we're going to look at this little thing here. And usually they are arranged in a set order where you start with the sounds of the languages and you work on to morphology and sort of words and how they're put together, and then you do syntax. So let's go to the verb section, and I'm going to be calm. So, as discussed in chapters 3, 4, and 6, verb words consist of an optional root followed by an obligatory agreement marker and a light verb, which bears tense and aspect features. So, all verbs in this language are morphologically complex, which means that they contain multiple morphemes. And also, if we look at some of the glosses here, you can see that Nagaya here is being glossed as C, and here you can see this is the same root. Here it's Nagiji, and looking at the vowels, it looks like there is some vowel harmony in this language. It looks like there is some height harmony at the very least. And here you can see, again, Nagiji for C, and then here you can see Mankia, which here is glossed as sit, and then Ambaya, which is glossed as talk. And then they all have these obligatory light verbs at the end. So ju, 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 and ju. So doing here. And I think it is the light verbs which were being treated, come, go, and do. The light verbs at the end here, which take grammatical particles and are adjusted based on the tense and the aspect, is what was being interpreted incorrectly here as the entire verb. So this would be like me saying that English has two nouns, right? And it's the blank noun and the plural noun, and the plural noun is S. Yeah, like that is how linguistically incorrect of a claim this is. Ooh, one sec. I'm going to be calm and fair. I understand how, as a non-linguist reading this grammar, you could misinterpret what's going on here. It's difficult for me to make the leap from misinterpreting something in a field that I am not part of to making broad claims about it to the press. But in linguistics, one of the things that is very valued is careful, slow scholarship, and I would say that that is not as valued in machine learning. Give me a second. It's poor scholarship. It is based on a foundationally incorrect claim about this extremely endangered language. It has a couple dozen speakers. And I did not see in interviews with this professor any discussion of how the speakers themselves feel about this. So, people's languages, particularly when they are minoritized languages, particularly when they are languages that have been forcibly, through imperialism and colonialism, made difficult or harmful for language users to use, are very tied to the cultural identity of the people who have that language as their, their birthright and their cultural origin and heritage, right? And it is, I'm sure many of you also speak languages other than English, perhaps as your home language, perhaps as your mother tongue, and have languages that you have a very strong emotional connection to, and can put yourself in the shoes of someone from a community that has been marginalized and had a lot of violence done to them. Can put yourself in the shoes of someone who is a speaker of that language, for whom, nope, I'm gonna take a, sorry, I knew it, I knew I'd get really upset about this. Ugh. Okay. This is such a crappy thing to do. It's such a crappy thing to reduce this, extremely personal, extremely rich part of the lives and heritage of a group of people who have already had so much shit done to them, and to recast it as a tool for machine learning using incorrect information in an extremely extractive way. If you are considering doing this, particularly with a language which is not yours and that you do not have the direct support of the language community in doing, please don't. Okay, and we're gonna move on before I lose it. Okay, moving on. Kind of calm down. Yep. It perpetuates a white dominator narrative. Yes, very much so. Very much. And again, I will say that I don't believe that the lead professor on this is white, but that does not mean that you cannot be white and still be promoting and perpetuating white supremacy. Okay. Anyway, bad all around. Please don't do it. And this article, which, speaking of just rough things to read about, so if you're familiar with CVPR, which is the big computer vision conference, recently they had a new guideline for the papers where they strongly encourage researchers whose papers were accepted to include a discussion about potential negative societal impacts of their research in their submission forms. And I will say that this is less strong of a push than what ACL did. ACL had specific ethics reviewers. I was an ethics reviewer. I think I did quite a few papers actually. To look over the papers and also encourage the inclusion of an ethics section. Docking says, thank you, these are important things to say. Yeah. I think we've talked on the channel before about how self-determination is something that I care a lot about. It's one of my core values. Another one is anti-imperialism, and I get it's a core value for me, right? It's very important to me that we are working towards a world where imperialist domination and violence is not centered. Anyway, because it doesn't happen, right? Not centered because we don't care about it, but not centered because it's been reduced. Dr. Gio says, machine learners, we don't need ethics courses. Machine learning practitioners doing that stuff. Yeah. Anyway. And this article talked in depth about, how some people didn't like doing this and thought it wasn't necessary. And I would say that it is necessary and we should all be doing this. And then, of course, great quote from Timnit, who we all know and love, really foundational in the AI ethics research space, that computer vision researchers have convinced itself that it's not their job to consider, the applications of their research. So there's a satirical song by, I think, Tom Lerner, possibly, about Nazi scientists researching rockets. And I think the song is called Werner von Braun, and he's like, well, my job is to make rockets go up. When it comes down, it's not my department. I don't have to deal with that. And I think that is a little bit of the prevailing viewpoint in some little pockets of machine learning. I don't think everyone. I think a lot of people do care and are trying their best, but right, just like with Amazon having health data, it only takes a couple bad actors to make things infinitely worse. We work in a field that scales things. Yep. And Gabriel's not going to be dealing with CVPR anymore, which honestly, I've mentioned a lot of times that I don't, I don't really do computer vision research, and there's a lot of reasons, but the community being sort of actively hostile towards thinking through the applications of their research is part of it. Yeah. Dr. Gio says, as a German, not my job is reminiscent of something. Yep. Brett says, not my job, same as people that don't write documentation. Yup. I don't know. Again, this is going back to my personal values, but I strongly believe that it's all of our jobs to make things better than we found them, right? Like, we're not responsible for all of the problems of the world. Like, if we didn't create the issue ourselves, then we don't have direct responsibility for having created it, but we still have a shared responsibility to address it. And anyway, again, personal values, that is my belief. And as sort of a chaser to that, Deb Raji has a really good thread on Twitter. And I think it's, whenever I get really overwhelmed with negative feelings about, you know, things in the field of machine learning generally, it really helps me to remember how many people there are working in machine learning that really care and are really working to change the field and to change society and to improve it. And Deb is one of those people. She is fantastic. So Bjorn says, I think the problem also stems from people in STEM fields, by and large, not really being interested in people. If you're not interested in people, you shouldn't be working with human data. That is my stance on the issue. If you don't care about people, you shouldn't work with language data, because all language data is human data. You shouldn't work with medical imaging. It's all people, right? You shouldn't work with face data. It's all people. But that said, I care about people a lot, as you may have guessed from my channel intro. Anyway, Deb gave a really good talk at ICML, basically addressing this problem of, like, it's not my job. Yeah. Dr. Gio says, what helps me is seeing these amazing people really care about and advocate about ethics. Yeah, right? It makes you feel less alone, and like there is hope and momentum, and we can work together and we can do it. There is also a good German word here, Weltschmerz. I don't know that word. I'm gonna look it up. World pain, also world weariness. World weariness, mental depression or apathy caused by comparison of the actual state of the world with an ideal state. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, like, there are ways that I would like the world to be, but also I know that my ideal is not going to be the same as other people's ideal. I think, so we can talk about Deb's thread in a while. There's a couple things that I really think about. So, and this is just sort of in activism in general, as well as in my work, is can we cause less people to be directly harmed, right? Can we reduce the total amount of harm? Can we give more people power over their decisions and their lives and what happens to them, right? So self-determination. And can we, you know, improve communal well-being, right? By doing those things. So those are sort of the guiding principles that I think about. I don't necessarily, like, I have really strong, you know, personal ethics, and I have really strong personal values, but I know that not everyone shares those values, and I know that not everyone shares my specific ethical stance. And I don't want, my goal is not to create a world where everyone perfectly agrees with me about ethics, right? That's ridiculous. And that's a fool's errand and counterproductive. My goal is to move towards a space where, again, we're reducing harm and we're giving more people power over themselves and their lives and their situation and their surroundings. And that might end up in a world where, like, some of my, you know, closely held ethical principles just aren't prioritized at a societal level, and that is okay. And I don't think that that's an issue. I think that a problem is if some people are making decisions for a lot of people, and the decisions that they make hurt a lot of people. I think that is the big problem that I am worried about, and I think that we as machine learning practitioners have the power to do, even unintentionally. So, yeah. Yeah. Dr. Gio says, there are a lot of important people and people I look up to that work ethically. Hard to explain in text, sorry. Oh, no, completely understand. Especially, like, I don't speak German. So I don't understand the full connotation of the word. But I do think that this is not a completely reaction to what you said. It's sort of a reaction to a reaction that other people have had to me talking about ethics is like, well, you just want to tell everybody what to do. And that's not the case. I don't want to be like, I am the ethics god. Come to me to know what is right and what is wrong. But I think that it's important that we work together as a community to not make things worse. And if possible, make things better. Dino says, as someone interested in NLP research, is it necessary to be grounded in linguistics? What resources would I recommend to learn linguistics? That's a great question. It depends. You don't necessarily need to have a good understanding of theoretical linguistics, but if you're going to make strong claims about the structure of a language, you should be able to support those claims. That's my stance on that. I think it might be available for free online. Let me double check it. So the I think you need to buy it. Maybe you don't. Let's see. Yeah, it is. So what I was going to recommend was Language Files, which is the introductory textbook that we used. For me, everything is language data. Do you consider numbers text data? Not usually. Yeah, no worries, Dr. Joe. But if you're interested in just learning linguistics for the purposes of doing NLP, Emily Bender actually has a couple books. And let me try and pull up the links really quick that are designed specifically for let's see, where's the books? I'm trying to get you the links so you can get them pretty easily. Here we go. Linguistic Fundamentals for Natural Language Processing is the series, and she has two. One of them is on morphology and syntax, and the other one is on other stuff. I forget what the second one is on. But if you're just looking to learn linguistics for NLP, that's what it's written for, so it'll be a good use of your time. Why don't I consider numbers text data? I guess I would consider it text data if they were produced by a human for the purpose of being arranged in that order for like an artistic reason. But if it's something like, measurements, I wouldn't consider that text data, right? It is text data in that it is written down. I wouldn't consider it text data as in it is human language data, if that makes sense. Anyway, so she talks about this particular thing as well, and I'm pretty sure that she works in computer vision, or at least did at some point. And basically she just talks about, the fact that we cannot pretend that research does not directly impact users, particularly since, a lot of people who are doing research at a company funded by the company, and then that research is immediately folded into products, often without the knowledge or, consent of the people whose data was used to train the thing, and then it's been folded into the product. So, yep. And then speaking of, this one's actually not for linguistics or NLP, but this is an example of scientific misconduct in another field that was really, really harmful, and some of you may have heard about. And since we talk a lot about research ethics, I think it's helpful to pull in examples from other fields. And this was in Alzheimer's research. So Alzheimer's is like a degenerative brain disease, where a key figures in a really important foundational project that led a lot of researchers to spend their careers focusing on this particular way of potentially curing this disease were falsified. So basically, there were lies published in a paper, and as a result, years and millions of dollars of research money have been spent trying to do something that just doesn't work. So research ethics are important, and not just in machine learning, right? It's something that all research fields are thinking about. Dr. Gio says, the only numbers I count as text data are generated by the count, one neuron. The count is a Sesame Street character, for any of you who did not grow up with Sesame Street. Bjorn says, my next semester at my master's will be fully focused on ethics. At least my educational organization takes it seriously. That's fabulous. That's really, really good to hear. Yeah, it's hard. We're definitely at a place where currently legislation is moving slower than ethical discussion in the field, and companies doing unethical things are moving even faster than that. So, yep. Also, in terms of data collection and ethics. So this is in the UK, and here the Metropolitan Police in London are paying actors like a lot of money, £25 an hour, which is certainly above minimum wage in the US. Let's see what minimum wage is in London. Minimum wage rates for 2022. I don't want to, here we go. Okay, so the national living wage in April 2022 nationally for the UK is £9.50 an hour. So it's, what's that, almost three times as much as the sort of the minimum wage. And enough that I would say that it's bordering on coercive, and in particular, they are hiring non-white actors to harvest facial data from. And just a big discussion of that. And this is something we calculated that in July alone, the Met has spent approximately £40,000 on paid actors. And I don't necessarily know that hiring more police officers would be a better use of that money, but facial recognition data is extremely expensive, and yep. Dr. Judah says, oh lordy, yep. Bjorn says London is very expensive to live in. Yeah, I don't know what the labor market, hourly labor market is like in London, but one of the things in research ethics is that if informed consent and free consent, right? So basically you don't want to pay people so much that they can't afford not to do the research because they won't be able to pay their bills, right? Like if you're paying an enormous amount of money for someone to do a research study, then they may be coerced to do that research study by the fact that they're getting paid so much. So. Luke says, every day I'm glad I don't live in London. Well, I would be shocked if they only use the models they're training here in London. So I think anyone in the UK, this is going to affect you. Purple Purrin says, when things are sold as AI, that's mostly a marketing. At this point, is there a distinction between ML or AI model? Not really. So I would say that there's not a specific distinction. I would say, first of all, there's not something that qualifies as AI specifically, right? Like you can have a rule-based system and call it an AI. So no, and there's no legislation on what you can and can't call machine learning or AI. And there are plenty of rule-based systems that people are selling as AI, just gonna say it. Luke says, but simultaneously sad, I still live in the UK. Yeah, sounds like y'all are having a rough time right now. So hopefully it gets better, and yep. And also in ethics, so if you've read the Stochastic Parrots paper, which I would say is, it's the paper that got Timnit fired, and Meg from Google, they talk quite a bit about mimicking human behavior using automated systems, AI, if you will, and sort of good ways and bad ways of doing that, and potential harms and risks. Robbie says, for example, still talking about like whether numbers are text data. Your you and your friend live far away. I go to the forest and I see a wonderful animal. I tell my friend about it. She responds, how big is the animal? And you answer this question. Suppose there was no math invented at that time. So the earliest units of measure were based on human body proportions. So like it's a cubit, right? In Egypt is roughly the distance from your fingertips to your elbow. Inches in the imperial system are based on 3 barley corns, which is a corn of barley, which is a type of grain which has a pretty consistent size. So I would probably describe it using either measures of my body or of the natural world that we shared. Although in this situation where there are no numbers, I am interested to hear in the situation before we have standardized measures. I'm interested to hear how information is traveling back and forth between England and the US. No. Oh yeah, because it's expensive to live in England. Eric says, just found you really enjoying the stream. Well, thank you. Have you already talked about OpenAI's DALL-E 2 unbiasing? Maybe a while ago. We talked quite a bit about attempted unbiasing in the interview I did last week with Yassine from Hugging Face and the Bloom model. But not in great detail. We tend to focus a little bit more on language technology than computer vision technology, but yep. Yeah, oh, you're very welcome, Kieran. Dr. Teal says, good old Excel AI, yep. Yeah. The emergence of, units and early measures is another thing that I'm just sort of interested in. I'm interested in a lot of stuff. I like humans. I want to know, what are we up to? What do we do in the day? What did we used to do? What's going on? Yeah. Also another fun fact, to this day, spinners who are spinning and are, taking yarn off of the spindle, if you have a nitty knotty, you'll use nitty knotty. It's a specialized tool, but if you don't, you'll just do it over your arm like this. That could be a unit of measurement, right? 1 forearm's worth. Anyway, yeah, I hope you like that, Eric. In this thread, she's comparing and contrasting 2, and I will pop this in the chat as well, 2 examples of producing text as if it were from somebody. And the first here is text that's being produced as if it was by philosopher Daniel Dennett. This is Daniel Dennett. He is living. He consented to being part of the study. He was involved in it. And she said this particular instance was done carefully, and I'd agree. I think this tends to be, if someone is, again, consenting to you using their language data to create instances as if they had said them, and is aware that you're doing it, I think that is cool and good. Much less good is, for instance, trying to put words in the mouth of the dead. In this case, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was a Supreme Court Justice in the United States who died. Anyway. And not only is it, obviously they didn't consent to this, right? She didn't consent to this in this instance, but we talked a little bit about different ways of knowing and different cultural contexts, and we were talking about Aboriginal languages, and one of the things that is very important in Aboriginal languages as an example is that there are a lot of, in some cultural instances, you cannot treat every indigenous group of Australia as if they were individual, but something that is common is prohibitions about speaking about or using words referring to the dead, and that is not super uncommon, globally for cultures to have like specific cultural prohibitions about that. And also it's gross and you shouldn't do it. So unless you have their express consent and permission to do it, don't try to build replicas of dead people. That's my stance on the matter. At a best case scenario, it's unethical or gross. At a worst case scenario, it can be used for harmful uses, right? All right, speaking of unethical and gross, so we've talked quite a bit on the channel about data brokers. which are companies that collect data and connect data between individuals, right? So like basically de-anonymizing, right? And a whole new class of data brokers are ones who are collecting data from cars. And if you're unfamiliar, in the US, it is very hard to live and do things and just sort of get around without a car. So a lot of people have cars, and a lot of cars have location data and internet connections built into them. And there's companies that are just collecting and buying and selling that data. TBD if this is going to continue to be a thing in the future. I imagine that this is something that legislation will come around to in hopefully the next little bit. But, you know, where are you driving your car to? Probably your home. This has, for me, this is a type of data collection that I am particularly worried about, and I think it has very clear harmful uses for, you know, doxing and stalkers and things like that. So, not good. And if you have a car with an internet connection, maybe see if you can turn it off potentially. Maybe there's a way for you to opt out from the data collection potentially. Who knows? Nope. Yeah, we talked about that a while ago. Hello Near This says, Alexa using the voice of dead grandparents to read stories to grandkids. Yep. Oh, yeah. Yes, so Hello Near This is also Brett. YouTube is lagging more because of the automated captions. And that's just a choice I had to make. Robbie says, without person's consent. Oh yeah, no, yeah. Remember, in the US, we don't have a lot of data privacy protections. And on that bummer note, let's finish off on a little bit of a lighter note. Life is not only suffering and pain. And let's talk about some stuff that's like a little bit more fun. Dr. Gio says, I need a Faraday cage for my rolling Faraday cage. I mean, yeah, I guess you couldn't do like an EMP thing because you'd also fry all of the electronics in your car. And also, I would not be shocked if some of those electric bikes also had location data sharing and internet connections, etc. So, yeah, I would say that if you can't necessarily get out of this by just riding a bike. All right. So this is just a funny thing. We talked about misinformation in Google snippets a little bit last week. So this is misinformation. It's a mistake. It's not intentionally trying to mislead people. But apparently if you search minimum sample size on Google search, which I don't really use, you'll get this this snippet that the minimum sample size is 100. And if you're not aware about why that's sort of funny, the minimum sample size depends on the population. It depends on the degree of variance within the population. There is no answer, right? This is a ridiculous thing. It's like me being like, what's the ideal weight? And someone saying 10, right? Like, oh, okay, that's probably not the ideal weight of a car and a building and an elephant and a cat and a desk, right? So just very silly. Don't trust this. Don't trust this card. The minimum sample size is situation dependent. Yeah. Dr. Gio says it's a selling point of Van Moofs, actually. Oh, interesting. I'm guessing that that's an electric bike brand. Good point. Hello Near This. Rental e-scooters, yes, definitely they're gonna have location data built in. Dr. Gio says it's the ideal weight of all the connections in my neural network. That star is a 10. Nope. Yeah. And another thing that I thought was just a cool thread. Luke says, I want to say I'm very grateful for your presence in this field, not only to highlight the various ethical issues, but finding interesting and useful things that could be used for good. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Dano says, sounds about Google. According to Google, the answer to life is 42. Yeah, that might be an Easter egg. People do tend to build nerd stuff into Google stuff. Aw, thank you, Dano. Yeah, I appreciate that. So this is a ooh, yeah, it sure does, doesn't it, Eric? A thread by this AI artist, Amla Art, AMLA_art, who also does crypto stuff, but I thought it was an interesting thread on art process. So this is an image that she made, and it just sort of walks through what she did, right? The prompt engineering, also some like parameter tuning, it looks like, and then an example of what the same prompt that she used looked like in another model. Obviously nothing like this very pretty image. So doing a lot of sampling and then cherry picking of those images, right? And then editing in Photoshop, and she used some additional programs to try and like further tweak the picture to make it look good. It looks like she used FaceApp in this particular example. It's not something she always does, but to sort of make it look more, I guess, Photoshopped. And then additional photoshopping, and then additional editing on the final image. So it's a very involved process, and I thought it was just a cool walkthrough of someone's process, and how it, how you can use these tools as art assistants, but it's certainly not, generating the perfect ideal final image on its own. Yeah. Brett says it totally is 42, and I know where my towel is at. Yes. That is, if any of you are not familiar, that is a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference by Douglas Adams. Robbie says you can hire an ethical hacker. Yeah, absolutely. White hats definitely exist and are around for sure. Hello near this says, is that editing a reinforcement learning? I don't think so. So I think this editing is just like regular image editing techniques. And this one, initial image in DD. I'm not entirely sure what DD is. Yeah, do not know. Disco diffusion is what she uses. Okay, so she was taking an example image and then tuning it. I don't know if it's reinforcement learning or not. Maybe. Yeah. Anyway, just a cool thread, and kind of a cool looking image. And then finally, I just saw this and thought it was neat. It may be a little bit hard to see on the screen, but this is a book of origami instructions in Braille, and it also includes, if you can see those sort of like little pictures there, diagrams of what the folded paper should look like as like a embossed, here it is, embossed Randlet Yoshizawa diagram. So those are like the those are what the diagrams are called in the origami instructional books. And here they've been translated into a tactile medium for accessibility, which I thought was just really cool. I have benefited certainly a lot from accessibility. I mean, I have my assistive devices on right now. Yeah. And if any of you are interested in, getting a copy of this, or have someone in your life who is vision impaired and likes origami, here is the information. Yeah, isn't that cool? Anyway, and I would say that this is, I don't know if this is language technology, but it's certainly a good use of technology and a cool thing. Yeah, so I just pasted it, Doctor. I think we got our stream things crossed. All right. And with that, my voice is starting to go. That is pretty much all I had for today. Some downers, some good things, and I'm, as always, very thankful for all of you for joining in. And I want to give a special shout out to my coffee supporters. Some of you are here live today. Thank you. I think I've mentioned this before. I'm trying to make this my full-time job, and you're making it possible. Or certainly I'm paying less to work. which I appreciate. So thank you so much for joining. My coffee supporters, the links are already up. I did them before the stream again today. I can't promise that that's always going to happen, but it did happen today. I think there's a bonus link in there as well that we didn't talk about on stream because I knew I would get too sassy. Yeah, thanks so much for joining. I hope you found this educational, informative. I hope you're full of, hope and resolution to make the world better. And I will be back on Tuesday for the next deep dive, and I don't know what it's going to be on yet. I've got a couple ideas I'm thinking about, so maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll do like a YouTube poll to see what feels like the best thing to y'all. All right. Oh, the coffee. All right, I'll show the coffee. Thank you. And I will pop the coffee link in the chat because Dr. Geo asked so nicely. And for, thank you, Luke. Those of you who are in the Chit Chat Club level of my monthly coffee supporters, the Chit Chat for the month is going to be tomorrow. And if you want to join, you can join tomorrow. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate you joining. I hope you have a great day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I will talk to you on Tuesday for something. I don't know. We'll do something fun. All right. I'll talk to you then. Bye.